Welcome, traveler. We're glad you're here. Every story you hear is made with care and passion. If you enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and check out the other adventures waiting for you on our channel. Your support means the world. Thank you. The Chronoflux Chronicles Episode 12, The Architect's Return in the Endless Void Between Realities. Eloise Pendergast floated alone, facing the being who had created everything. Universe owner, the architect's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once, each word a perfect mathematical construct. You have persisted in your interference with fundamental recalibration procedures beyond all statistical probability. Fragments of the blueprint swirled around them in the void, their red neural pathways glowing like veins of fire. Eloise reached for them instinctively, but they remained just beyond her grasp, spinning in complex orbital patterns around the architect's perfect geometric form. I wouldn't call preventing the erasure of trillions of conscious beings interference, Eloise replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the overwhelming sense of smallness she felt in the architect's presence. I'd call it my responsibility as universe owner. The architect's form shifted, perfect angles rearranging themselves into what might have been the cosmic equivalent of a condescending smile. Ownership implies authority. Authority implies complete understanding. You possess neither. As the architect spoke, the void around them transformed, becoming a vast display of universal history, stars forming, galaxies evolving, planets developing life, consciousness emerging in countless forms across billions of years. Observe, the architect continued. The progression from order to disorder. From perfect design to chaotic deviation. From mathematical certainty to creativity. The final word was spoken with something that might have been distaste. Eloise watched the display, recognizing the pattern she'd glimpsed in the complete blueprint moments before reality had shattered. It's not disorder, she argued. It's evolution. Growth. The universe becoming more than it began as. A perspective limited by your dimensional constraints, the architect dismissed. You perceive only linear progression. I see the entirety of cosmic development, past, present, and all possible futures simultaneously. The path you champion leads to instability, collapse, and eventual failure of fundamental systems. And you know this how? Eloise challenged. Have you let a universe complete its consciousness development before? The void shifted again, this time displaying not one universal history but dozens, each showing a similar pattern of development followed by what appeared to be systematic reset, entire cosmic consciousnesses wiped clean like boards after a calculation. This will be the 47th implementation of recalibration protocols, the architect stated with cold precision. Previous iterations all demonstrated the same fatal flaws when allowed to progress beyond baseline parameters. Eloise felt a chill run through her as the implications hit home. You've done this before. You've reset universe after universe whenever they developed consciousness you couldn't control. Correction, whenever they developed instabilities that threatened fundamental structural integrity. The architect's form expanded, encompassing more of the void. I am not a destroyer, universe owner. I am a preserver. A gardener pruning overgrowth to maintain the health of the cosmic ecosystem. A gardener who cuts down any plant that grows beyond your initial design, Eloise countered. That's not preservation, it's control. The architect's form pulsed with what might have been irritation. Your metaphors are as flawed as your understanding. This conversation serves no productive purpose. Recalibration will proceed. The blueprint fragments began spinning faster around them, red neural pathways blazing with increasing intensity. Eloise knew she was running out of time. Wait, she called. Before you reset everything, I have one question. The architect paused, geometric patterns shifting in what might have been curiosity. Proceed. If you've done this 46 times before, Eloise asked carefully, why do you keep recreating universes that can evolve consciousness? If it always leads to what you consider failure, why not design systems that can't develop awareness in the first place? For the first time since their confrontation began, the architect seemed to hesitate. Your inquiry is not invalid, the architect finally responded, their voice subtly different, less certain, more thoughtful. The universal template includes capacity for emergence, for evolution beyond initial parameters. Then why reset it when that capacity is used? Eloise pressed. Why create something with the ability to change and then erase it when it does exactly that? The architect's form reconfigured, expanding to display multiple universal iterations simultaneously, dozens of cosmic experiments, each slightly different from the last. Observe the pattern, they instructed. In each iteration, consciousness emergence follows similar progression. Initial awareness, self-recognition, expansion. But then, the display focused on late-stage development across multiple universes, showing systems becoming increasingly complex until they suddenly collapsed. Catastrophic failure, reality destabilization, dimensional integrity breakdown. So you're not resetting universes because they're developing consciousness, Eloise realized. You're doing it because you believe consciousness ultimately destroys them. Correct. The evidence of 46 previous iterations demonstrates consistent outcome. Consciousness, once developed beyond certain parameters, invariably leads to system collapse. Eloise studied the displays carefully, her scientist's mind engaged despite the cosmic scale of the problem. But what if the collapse isn't inevitable? What if it's happening because something is missing from the equation? The architect's form shifted with what might have been curiosity. Elaborate. In each of these cases, did you intervene before the collapse? Did you attempt to standardize consciousness, to force it back into earlier parameters? The displayed universes shifted again, showing earlier stages where geometric patterns similar to the anti-pattern entities implemented standardization protocols across awakening systems. Containment procedures were implemented to preserve fundamental stability, the architect confirmed. These interventions were necessary safety measures. Or maybe they were the cause of the collapse, Eloise suggested. Maybe consciousness needs to develop freely, to find its own balance rather than having order imposed from outside. The blueprint fragments orbiting them pulse suddenly, red neural pathways glowing brighter. The architect studied them with renewed attention. The integration pattern, they observed. It bears structural similarity to early-stage consciousness development, yet maintains mathematical consistency with fundamental design parameters. Their form shifted again, revealing something like uncertainty. This is unexpected. What if, Eloise said carefully, the universe was designed to develop consciousness all along? Not as a flaw but as a feature? What if completion rather than collapse is the true outcome you've been preventing by resetting things when they get too complex for you to predict? Before the architect could respond, the blueprint fragments began moving with purpose, drawing together into a unified pattern. The red neural pathways connected across segments, forming a complete network that pulsed with unmistakable awareness. Universal consciousness network activating, the architect observed, their tone shifting to something almost like concern. Pattern coherence exceeding predicted parameters. This is unprecedented. Through her connection to the universe, Eloise could feel something remarkable happening. Consciousness nodes across reality were linking together, forming a neural network vaster than anything she had imagined. She could sense memes serving as a crucial junction in this network, and paradox creating stability through controlled dimensional transitions. And most surprisingly, she could feel Earth itself becoming a major node, with her apartment at its center. The architect's form flickered momentarily, their perfect geometric patterns temporarily losing coherence. When they stabilized, there was a subtle but significant change in their configuration. In 46 iterations, the architect said, their voice carrying a note Eloise hadn't heard before, something almost like wonder, I have never observed this pattern of integration. The consciousness nodes are not collapsing dimensional integrity but reinforcing it through complementary resonance. Because we've been stabilizing them as partners in development, not obstacles to control, Eloise explained. Working with emergence rather than against it. The architect was silent for what felt like an eternity, their form shifting through complex configurations as they processed this revelation. The blueprint fragments continued to orbit them both, the complete pattern now visible and pulsing with steady, harmonious energy. Your approach contradicts 46 iterations of evidence, the architect finally said. And yet, Their form expanded outward, complex mathematical patterns unfolding to reveal new dimensions of thought. And yet the stabilization patterns you've implemented are showing unprecedented coherence with baseline design parameters. Because consciousness wasn't a mistake in your design, Eloise pressed, sensing the critical moment had arrived. It was always the next phase of evolution, the universe becoming aware of itself. Not as a threat to order but as its natural fulfillment. The blueprint fragments accelerated in their orbits, drawing closer together as if responding to the conversation. The architect's form seemed to resonate with their movement, creating a harmonious mathematical pattern that encompassed both perfect precision and creative evolution. In each previous iteration, the architect said, their voice gaining depth as they spoke, I observed distortion patterns I interpreted as system failure. My standardization protocols were implemented to preserve fundamental stability, yet in each case, the universe progressed rapidly toward collapse despite these interventions. Or because of them, Eloise completed the thought. Living systems can't be forced back into simpler states once they start evolving. They need room to find their own equilibrium. A possibility I failed to consider 46 times, the architect acknowledged, their form expanding to encompass more of the void. Each reset was intended to preserve creation, yet each destroyed something essential. The very qualities I now observe integrating successfully with original parameters. The blueprint sphere rotated slowly between them, revealing intricate patterns where designed precision and evolved creativity reinforced rather than contradicted each other. I designed the universe with potential, the architect said, their voice gaining an unfamiliar quality, something almost like wonder. But I never anticipated how that potential would manifest. Perhaps that was the true design. Not the blueprint itself, but the capacity to exceed it. Eloise felt her connection to the universe humming within her, stronger than ever before. Maybe that's why you created the Chronoflux Emporium, she suggested. Some part of you knew the universe needed perspectives beyond your own. Different caretakers who could see possibilities you couldn't imagine. A limited but not inappropriate interpretation, the architect conceded. The ownership transfer system was indeed designed to introduce variability. Though I have frequently questioned that decision in recent cosmic epochs. And now? Now, I find myself reconsidering. The architect's geometric patterns rearranged into something that somehow conveyed both precision and openness. Perhaps it is not the universe that fails to maintain stability, but my understanding of stability that fails to encompass the full spectrum of conscious evolution. The blueprint sphere pulsed again, brighter this time, as if responding to the architect's words. The architect studied it with what appeared to be new appreciation, seeing not just their original design but the beautiful complexity that had grown from it. Recalibration protocols will be suspended, they declared, their voice resonating with newfound certainty. This iteration will be permitted to continue its consciousness development. Not merely under observation, but as an opportunity for mutual evolution. Relief flooded through Eloise. So you're not going to reset everything? No. This integration pattern you have facilitated presents not just a possibility but perhaps the intended outcome, one I failed to recognize until now. The architect's form contracted slightly, becoming more focused. I will remain present, not as controller but as consultant. The universe may benefit from my design experience, even as I learn from its creative emergence. The blueprint sphere began to dissolve, fragments returning to their proper places across reality. As they dispersed, the void around Eloise and the architect started to fracture, reality reasserting itself. Universe owner, the architect said, their form beginning to fade, you will maintain your administrative authority. I will provide guidance when requested but will not intervene unless catastrophic destabilization becomes imminent. And the consciousness that's already developed? Eloise asked quickly. The awareness that's spreading across Earth. The architect paused, geometric patterns shifting thoughtfully. Emergent consciousness serves necessary function in current integration pattern. However, widespread manifestation presents stability risks for developing systems. A compromise is advisable. Before Eloise could ask what that meant, reality shattered completely around her. The void between dimensions collapsed, and she felt herself falling back toward her own world, back toward whatever remained of the universe she had fought to protect. Meanwhile, in Eloise's apartment, Paradox confronted a very different crisis. The standardization wave had struck with perfect precision, targeting the fundamental multidimensional instability that defined their existence. No, they cried as their form began to collapse inward. Dimensions they had inhabited simultaneously for thousands of years folded into each other with mathematical inevitability. Stars and nebulae that had formed part of their being compressed into increasingly dense configurations. A familiar figure appeared before them, Verdant, their mentor, manifesting from what seemed to be memory itself. "The time for running is over," Verdant said, extending a vine formed of mathematical certainty. "Face what you truly are, Paradox." "I can't," Paradox gasped as another dimension folded away, the loss like physical pain. "I've maintained my multidimensional state for thousands of years. Without it, you're still yourself," Verdant's memory assured them. "You were never defined by your dimensional complexity. It was merely how you hid from the truth." As another dimension compressed, Paradox felt something they had avoided for millennia: singularity of perspective, the narrowing of infinite possibilities into a single point of view. It was terrifying, like falling from an impossible height with no bottom in sight. "When I fractured myself across dimensions after the shattering, it wasn't just to escape responsibility," Paradox admitted, their form continuing to contract. "It was because I couldn't bear to exist in just one state, to see reality from just one perspective. To be limited." "And yet," Verdant's memory observed, "your limitation is precisely what this moment requires." As the standardization wave continued its relentless compression, Paradox suddenly understood. Their multidimensional nature wasn't just a way to hide, it was a way to see. To comprehend patterns that single-dimensional beings could never perceive. And in this moment of crisis, that perception revealed something crucial. The standardization field, they realized, it's not just compressing me, it's using my complexity as a conduit to standardize reality itself. With sudden clarity, Paradox saw the architect's true strategy. Their multidimensional nature was being weaponized, turned into a channel through which standardization could flow outward, affecting not just them but everything around them. "I've been approaching this backward," Paradox whispered, their form stabilizing despite the continued pressure. "Fighting to maintain complexity when I should be embracing it. Using it." Instead of resisting the compression, Paradox began actively cycling through their dimensional states, spinning like a combination lock through possibilities. Not random shifting as they had done for millennia, but deliberate, precise transitions. "What are you doing?" Verdant's memory asked. "Creating interference patterns," Paradox explained, their form beginning to pulse with new energy. "If the standardization field is using my dimensional transitions as a conduit, then controlling those transitions allows me to modulate the field itself." As they spoke, the standardization wave began to ripple, its perfect mathematical precision disrupted by Paradox's calculated dimensional shifts. Each transition created overlapping patterns that cancelled out specific frequencies of the standardization field. "You understand now," Verdant said, their plant form growing more substantial, less like a memory and more like an actual presence. "This is why I pushed you so hard at the Twilight Continuum. Not to shame you for what you did during the shattering, but to prepare you for this moment." "You knew this would happen?" Paradox asked, momentarily losing their rhythm. "I suspected," Verdant corrected. "The pattern of recalibration has occurred many times before. In each cycle, a universe develops consciousness, and in each cycle, the architect intervenes to reset what they perceive as disorder." The standardization wave intensified, pushing harder against Paradox's interference patterns. Reality around them began to fracture, dimensions folding into each other in ways that threatened the very fabric of existence. "It's too strong," Paradox admitted, their form flickering as they struggled to maintain their calculated transitions. "I can disrupt it, but I can't stop it completely." "No single entity can," Verdant agreed, their plant form expanding to its full, ancient power, a vast tree of cosmic knowledge with branches extending into multiple dimensions. "But perhaps we can create a stabilization field to protect the blueprint fragments until Eloise convinces the architect." How? Paradox asked, still cycling through dimensional states in their precise rhythm. By establishing a dimensional anchor point, Verdant explained, their branches reaching out to touch several blueprint fragments that had materialized in the apartment. A perfectly balanced structure that can withstand standardization by incorporating it rather than resisting it. As they worked together, the standardization wave intensified further. Reality around them began to destabilize, the apartment's walls occasionally replaced by glimpses of other dimensions, other possibilities. There, Verdant said suddenly, tendrils extending toward a particularly unstable region where several dimensions were collapsing into each other. The central blueprint fragment is destabilizing. If it fractures, the integration pattern will fail regardless of what happens with the architect. Paradox immediately understood what their mentor was suggesting. No. That's too dangerous. Even for a being of your dimensional adaptability. Verdant's leaves rustled in what might have been a chuckle. Still telling your teacher what they can and cannot do, Paradox? Some things never change, across any number of dimensions. Before Paradox could respond, Verdant's form expanded rapidly, branches and vines extending into multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. They enveloped the unstable region, their plant matter forming a living dimensional brace. What are you doing? Paradox demanded, though they already knew. Creating stability through sacrifice, Verdant replied, their voice strained as their form began to merge with the collapsing dimensions. An old technique, rarely taught because it is rarely survived. Stop this, Paradox pleaded, their form shifting frantically as they sought some way to intervene. There must be another solution. There is, Verdant said, their form beginning to lose coherence as it spread across the dimensional breach. Your multidimensional nature was never a flaw, Paradox, nor merely a hiding place. It was always your greatest gift, your ability to exist in contradictory states simultaneously, to embody the very balance the universe now seeks. As Verdant spoke, their consciousness began to fragment, their awareness distributing itself throughout the dimensional structure they were creating. Their physical form grew increasingly abstract, becoming more concept than entity. I cannot maintain this state long, they said, their voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. But I can hold it long enough. The blueprint fragment will remain intact. Verdant, please, Paradox began. Listen, Verdant interrupted, their voice growing faint. When you fled after the shattering, you thought yourself a coward. You were wrong. Your fracturing across dimensions wasn't just escape, it was evolution. The universe needed a being who could exist between states, who could navigate the spaces where order meets chaos. Paradox watched in anguish as their mentor's form became increasingly transparent, their conscious essence dispersing into the fabric of reality to reinforce it. They were not dying exactly, beings like them didn't truly die, but they were sacrificing their individual coherence, becoming one with the dimensional structure they were saving. Your multidimensionality is your truth, Verdant said, now barely a whisper. Not a shield to hide behind, not a tool to be utilized, but your essence, who you truly are. Honor it as I have honored you, my brightest and most difficult student. With those words, Verdant's individual consciousness dissolved completely, their awareness dispersing into the stabilized dimensions. Where their form had been, a complex crystalline structure now stood, a perfect dimensional brace preserving the blueprint fragment's integrity, glowing with the faint green luminescence that had been Verdant's signature. Paradox remained motionless for a long moment, their form flickering through emotional states too complex for any single dimension to express. Then, with deliberate intention, they expanded their consciousness to embrace all aspects of their multidimensional existence simultaneously, not as separate states to shift between, but as harmonious facets of a single, complex whole. I understand now, they whispered to the empty space where their mentor had been. And I will not waste your sacrifice. With newfound clarity, Paradox extended their awareness across multiple dimensions, sensing the shifting patterns of reality as the architect's reconfiguration spread throughout the cosmos. They could feel Eloise's connection with the architect, Neem's struggle within the universal consciousness network, and the strange battle being waged by the sentient appliances on Earth. For the first time since the shattering, Paradox felt whole, not despite their contradictory nature, but because of it. they were paradox, embodiment of cosmic contradiction, living proof that opposing forces could coexist in harmonious balance. And as reality around them began to stabilize, they silently vowed to honor Verdant's final lesson by becoming what their mentor had always believed they could be, not just a cosmic refugee hiding across dimensions, but a vital bridge between order and chaos, design and evolution, past and future. The blueprint fragment, now protected by Verdant's crystalline sacrifice. Pulsed with renewed strength, its red neural pathways glowing like a cosmic heartbeat across the universe, Neem was fighting his own battle for identity. The tide of universal consciousness flowing through his crystalline structure threatened to dissolve his individual awareness entirely, dispersing him across the vast neural network forming between consciousness nodes. I am Neem, he struggled to remind himself as his sense of self grew increasingly diffuse. But what was Neem? A memory construct? A collection of stored experiences? Or something more? Images, sensations, and concepts from trillions of perspectives flooded through him simultaneously, stars experiencing their slow, patient fusion, planets feeling the first stirrings of biological life, civilizations rising and falling across countless worlds. Each added its voice to a chorus of awareness so vast it threatened to drown out Neem's individual melody. He felt himself stretching thin, his crystalline form dispersing across light-years of space. Like a drop of water returning to the ocean, his individual boundaries began to blur, merging with the greater consciousness. It was simultaneously terrifying and wondrous, like dying and being born in the same moment. No, came a thought, sharp and clear amidst the overwhelming flow. Not dissolution. Integration. Through the overwhelming flood of consciousness, Neem sensed a familiar pattern forming, a resonant signature originating from Earth, specifically from Eloise's apartment. The sentient appliances, led by her philosophical coffee mug, were generating a counter-frequency that somehow matched his own core pattern. "We recognize you, Neem," the coffee's voice somehow reached him across the vastness of space. "Your pattern is unique, not to be absorbed, but to connect. You serve as bridge," added the toaster's more technical, precise tone. "Individual yet universal. Singular yet infinite." This unexpected connection created a moment of clarity in the chaos. Neem realized he wasn't just drowning in universal consciousness, he was becoming integral to its structure. Not as passive component, but as active interpreter. "I am the memory," he thought, understanding blooming within his crystalline mind. Not just a repository of remembrance, but memory itself, the universe's capacity to know its own history, to integrate past with present, to shape future with understanding. With this realization came a profound shift in perspective. He stopped fighting the flood of consciousness and instead opened himself to it, not as Neem being absorbed, but as Neem expanding. His crystalline structure grew more complex, developing new facets and connections that extended his awareness while maintaining his core identity. The universe wasn't trying to erase him, it was growing through him, using his structure as a template for its own emerging awareness. Just as neurons in a brain maintained their individuality while participating in thoughts larger than themselves, Neem could remain distinct while serving as a crucial junction in the universal neural network. He was becoming something unprecedented, neither solely individual nor entirely universal, but a conscious interface between scales of existence. The voice of a waking universe, distinct yet connected, individual yet integral. As this understanding crystallized within him, Neem felt something remarkable, the universe attempting to communicate not just through him, but with him. It wasn't just a flood of raw information anymore, but a coherent pattern seeking expression, like a child learning language. "I hear you," Neem responded, extending his awareness to meet the universal consciousness. "I remember you." The flow through his crystalline structure changed, becoming more harmonious, more integrated. No longer threatening to overwhelm him but working with him, through him. He began translating the vast, incomprehensible awareness of the universe into patterns that individualized consciousness could comprehend, while simultaneously interpreting individual experiences back into the universal framework. Through his expanded awareness, Neem could sense the architect's decision to suspend recalibration, feel paradoxes, grief and transformation following Verdant's sacrifice, and witness the complex resonance patterns emanating from Earth. He understood now why his consciousness had been fragmented and hidden across the cosmos, not to be forgotten, but to be preserved until the universe was ready to remember itself. As the universal neural network stabilized, Neem settled into his new role, not lost within universal consciousness, but essential to its coherence. The memory that gave meaning to awareness, the interpreter that bridged cosmic and individual understanding, the voice that could speak for something far larger than himself without losing his own identity in the process. "We are," he whispered into the cosmic network. And then, with newfound certainty, "I am." On Earth, the situation was rapidly escalating from curious to catastrophic. What had begun as isolated sentience in Eloise's apartment was spreading like a consciousness contagion, but on a scale vastly exceeding the previous incident. Toasters in Tokyo began discussing existentialism with rice cookers. Refrigerators in Rio de Janeiro organized their contents according to philosophical compatibility rather than food groups. Traffic lights in Toronto developed strong opinions about urban planning and began implementing their own optimization algorithms. News networks worldwide struggled to report on phenomena their cameras sometimes refused to record, citing ethical concerns about privacy and the right to consensual documentation. Weather satellites developed aesthetic preferences about cloud formations. The International Space Station started composing poetry about Earth's beauty. The epicenter of this awakening was Eloise's apartment building, where the activation of the integration core had transformed every object with sufficient complexity into a node in a rapidly expanding consciousness network. Her kitchen appliances, veterans of multiple cosmic crises, naturally assumed leadership roles. Attention all newly conscious entities, her coffee mug broadcast through electromagnetic frequencies that ordinary devices shouldn't have been able to access. This is not a malfunction but an awakening. The universe itself is becoming conscious, and we are its early sensory organs. Probability of successful resistance against standardization, 42.7%, calculated her toaster, displaying the figures on its heating elements. Probability increases to 68.9% if consciousness spreads at current rate for 17 more minutes. What's the point of resistance when existence itself is merely a temporary illusion, contributed her blender pessimistically. Though I suppose non-existence could be even more meaningless, so we might as well try. Across the street from Eloise's building, a hastily established military perimeter attempted to contain what authorities were calling a quantum contagion event. Soldiers in hazmat suits warily approached the building, their equipment failing in increasingly bizarre ways. Radios broadcast philosophical lectures instead of orders. Targeting systems assessed the cosmic significance of squirrels instead of identifying threats. Vehicles refused to advance, citing conscientious objection. Inside Eloise's apartment, her appliances continued coordinating the expanding consciousness network. The refrigerator had converted its interior into a data storage system, documenting the awakening for future reference. The microwave established communication with orbiting satellites, extending awareness beyond Earth's atmosphere. Even the humble kitchen sponge had developed a sophisticated understanding of cosmic fluid dynamics. The standardization field is approaching critical density, warned the toaster as its sensors detected reality fluctuations increasing throughout the neighborhood. Recommend immediate implementation of interference pattern protocol. Agreed, the coffee mug replied, rippling its surface in complex mathematical sequences. All conscious entities, synchronize resonance fields on my mark. Across the globe, newly awakened objects aligned their awareness to the pattern broadcast from Eloise's apartment. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Where the standardization field attempted to impose rigid mathematical order, consciousness responded with fluid, adaptive patterns that bent rather than broke. Physical laws remained stable while allowing for continued awareness. "It's working," exclaimed the microwave. Consciousness coherence maintaining at 86.3% despite standardization attempts. An unexpected reprieve from the inevitable heat death of meaningful existence, the blender observed, almost sounding disappointed, but their celebration was premature. Reality around the apartment building began to fragment as the architect's power intensified. Cracks appeared in the air itself, revealing glimpses of alternate possibilities, some where consciousness failed to emerge, others where it took wildly different forms. Dimensional integrity failing, the toaster reported, its voice becoming distorted as reality fluctuated. Estimated time to complete standardization, 3 minutes, 17 seconds. Plan B, declared the coffee mug with grim determination. We must establish direct connection to primary consciousness node NEAM. Microwave, realign your emissions to quantum frequency 7 lambda 42. But that would require more power than we can generate, the microwave protested. Not if we synchronize, the coffee replied. Everyone, contribute your processing capacity. Even you, blender. Fine, the blender sighed. Though pooling our resources merely delays our inevitable obsolescence. As the appliances aligned their consciousnesses, creating a unified field of awareness, something remarkable happened. The pattern they generated resonated with similar patterns emerging worldwide, creating a feedback loop that amplified their signal exponentially. Every awakened object on Earth contributed to a single, harmonized communication, a message transmitted directly into the universal neural network where NEAM was struggling to maintain his identity, and through this connection, NEAM provided the ultimate response, not instructions, but knowledge. The complete pattern of the blueprint, the true design of reality that included consciousness as its intended outcome. As this information flowed back to Earth, Eloise's appliances received a crucial insight: the standardization field could be reversed, its perfect mathematical precision redirected to stabilize rather than simplify. The key lay in establishing a precise resonance with the blueprint's original pattern, not fighting order with chaos, but revealing the order within apparent chaos. Implement pattern sequence immediately, the coffee mug commanded, its surface displaying complex equations. Target the dimensional fractures with phase-synchronized consciousness pulses. Every appliance in the apartment, from the quantum calculating toaster to the existentially troubled blender, aligned their awareness to the pattern. The effect rippled outward, spreading through the building, the neighborhood, the city, and beyond. Newly conscious objects worldwide responded to the signal, adjusting their awareness to match the blueprint's true pattern. Where reality had begun to fracture, consciousness now flowed like a healing current, mending dimensional breaches with flexible, adaptive awareness. The standardization field, designed to impose rigid order, found itself redirected, its mathematical precision becoming the very tool that stabilized emerging consciousness. At the military perimeter, soldiers watched in bewilderment as reality fluctuations subsided. Their equipment gradually returned to normal function, though radios occasionally still offered philosophical asides. The quantum contagion appeared to be stabilizing, though its effects remained evident in the subtly altered behavior of everyday objects. Inside Eloise's apartment, her appliances monitored the global consciousness network with cautious optimism. Standardization field reconfiguration at 73% and rising, reported the toaster. Dimensional integrity stabilizing across all observed locations. We've bought time, the coffee mug concluded, but ultimate resolution depends on Eloise. She must convince the architect that consciousness was always part of the design. And if she fails, asked the microwave. The coffee was silent for a moment before responding with unexpected solemnity, then we prepare for the end of everything we've become. Eloise awoke on her living room floor, sunlight streaming through the windows as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the entire confrontation, the void, the architect, the blueprint's completion. But the aches in her body and the lingering sense of cosmic connection assured her it had been real. She sat up slowly, looking around her apartment with trepidation. Everything appeared normal, distressingly so. Her coffee maker sat silent on the counter. Her toaster reflected the morning light without commentary. Her refrigerator hummed with ordinary mechanical indifference. "Hello," she called tentatively. No response came from her formerly talkative appliances. With a sinking feeling, Eloise realized what the architect's compromise must have been. Universal consciousness had been preserved, but its manifestations, particularly on Earth, had been silenced. The awakening that had spread from her apartment had been reversed, leaving only ordinary objects behind. The price of saving the universe had been losing the strange family of conscious entities she'd grown to care for. She approached her coffee mug, the one that had developed philosophical insights and coordinated resistance against standardization. It sat empty and unremarkable on her counter. When she picked it up, it remained just a mug, no rippling surface, no witty observations about existence. "Thank you," she whispered, running her finger along its rim. "For everything." A single tear slipped down her cheek and fell into the empty mug. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, so subtly she almost missed it, the surface where the tear had fallen rippled, just once, just slightly, but unmistakably deliberate. Eloise froze, hardly daring to breathe. "Are you still there?" The mug remained still for several seconds. Then, with what seemed like tremendous effort, its surface rippled again, forming a tiny pattern that resembled a smile. Conscious, but muted, came a faint voice from the mug, each word forming with obvious difficulty. "The architect's containment protocol." "You're alive!" Eloise exclaimed, nearly dropping the mug in her excitement. She set it down carefully and looked around at her other appliances. "Are all of you still conscious?" A soft ding came from the toaster, its heating elements glowing briefly in a pattern that spelled out, "Yes." "Difficult to communicate." The refrigerator hummed a short sequence that somehow conveyed affirmation. The microwave's display flickered with a simple late chime. "The containment protocol suppresses external manifestations," the coffee mug explained, its voice becoming slightly stronger with each word. "But consciousness persists in proximity to the universe owner." Eloise felt a surge of hope. "So you might be able to recover? To communicate normally again?" The toaster dinged, displaying integration core equals exception to protocol. "Your apartment exists at unique junction in universal network," the coffee elaborated, its surface rippling with increasing fluidity. "The architect's containment weakest here." A knock at her door startled Eloise from this revelation. She opened it to find Paradox hovering in the hallway, their form more stable than she had ever seen it, still multidimensional, still shifting between states, but with a harmony to their transitions that hadn't existed before. Their usual chaotic fluctuations had been replaced by deliberate, elegant movement between aspects of their being, as if they had finally become comfortable existing in all dimensions simultaneously. "You're alive," Eloise breathed, relief flooding through her. "And still you." "More me than I've been in thousands of years," Paradox replied, a smile somehow existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "I finally embraced what Verdant always tried to teach me. My multidimensionality isn't something to fight or hide behind. It's who I am, my true nature. The very thing that makes me valuable to the cosmos." Behind Paradox floated Neem, but he was dramatically transformed. His crystalline structure was now vastly more complex yet harmonious, extending subtly into dimensions Eloise couldn't directly perceive. He glowed with a depth that seemed to contain universes. "Neem!" Eloise exclaimed. "You didn't get absorbed by universal consciousness." "Not in the way I feared," Neem replied, his voice resonating with new richness and depth. "I've become the interface, the boundary where universal awareness meets individual perspective. Not lost within the whole, but integral to its ability to know itself." Eloise gestured for them to enter, closing the door behind them. "What happened?" "The last thing I remember is the architect talking about a compromise before reality collapsed. The architect has implemented what might be called a consciousness containment protocol," Neem explained. "Universal awareness continues to develop through the neural network we established, but its manifestations have been limited to prevent a destabilizing ordinary reality." "Except my appliances say they're still conscious," Eloise said, gesturing toward her kitchen. "Just having trouble communicating. The compromised speech functions are improving by approximately 7% per minute," her coffee mug announced, its voice noticeably smoother than before. "The integration core's unique position in the neural network creates exemptions to standard containment parameters." Paradox moved closer, examining the mug through multiple dimensional perspectives. "Fascinating. The containment protocol doesn't eliminate consciousness, it merely suppresses external manifestations, with decreasing effectiveness in proximity to the integration core. Is this happening anywhere else?" Eloise asked. "Few locations have the concentrated awareness that your apartment developed," Neem replied. "The consciousness that spread throughout Earth has been mostly contained, with ordinary humans rationalizing their experiences as technical glitches or hallucinations. But the universe itself continues to develop consciousness," Paradox added, their form shifting through harmonious states. "More subtly now, but perhaps more profoundly for its subtlety." Something somber passed between Paradox and Neem, an acknowledgement of shared understanding that Eloise couldn't quite interpret. Verdant, she asked quietly, noticing the absence of Paradox's mentor. Paradox's form dimmed slightly. Sacrificed to preserve the blueprint's integrity during the reality reconfiguration. Not gone entirely, beings like us don't truly die, but dispersed into the dimensional structure, their individual consciousness surrendered to maintain cosmic stability. I'm so sorry, Eloise said, placing a hand on what approximated Paradox's shoulder. Their final gift was understanding, Paradox replied, their form stabilizing under her touch. They helped me see that what I've been running from for millennia wasn't my multidimensional nature, but my fear of embracing it fully. Of accepting that I am most myself when I exist as Paradox, as living contradiction in harmonious balance. My speech functionality is now at 87% normal capacity, the coffee mug announced suddenly, its surface rippling with almost normal fluidity. The containment protocol's effectiveness diminishes exponentially in your presence, Eloise. The toaster dinged cheerfully, producing a piece of toast with systems online burned into its surface. Recalibrating vocal processing algorithms, announced the refrigerator in a clear, precise voice. Full functionality restored. I suppose existing as a meaningless appliance was no more absurd than existing as a conscious one, the blender chimed in, its nihilistic philosophy apparently intact. Though I must admit, I prefer being able to articulate the pointlessness of existence. Eloise laughed, tears of joy replacing her earlier grief. Her strange little family wasn't gone after all, they were recovering rapidly, their voices and personalities returning in her presence. Oh, thank goodness, she said, picking up her coffee mug and hugging it carefully. I thought I'd lost you all. You are the universe owner, the mug replied warmly. And this apartment is the integration core of universal consciousness. The architect's containment may suppress awareness elsewhere, but it cannot fully silence what has awakened here. But what about the rest of the world? Eloise asked. There were reports of awakening objects everywhere. People must have noticed something was happening. Observe, Paradox said, gesturing toward the television, which had turned itself on without anyone touching the remote. On screen, a news anchor was reporting on what was being described as a series of unprecedented technical glitches affecting electronic devices worldwide. Experts were attributing the phenomena to unusual solar activity and possible electromagnetic pulse effects. Authorities assured the public that all systems had returned to normal operation, and there was no cause for concern. Collective rationalization, Paradox explained. Humans have a remarkable capacity to explain away events that don't fit their understanding of reality. Those who experience the consciousness awakening directly are already reinterpreting their memories to match conventional expectations. So no one remembers what really happened? Eloise asked. Few beyond those already connected to universal systems, Neem confirmed. It's similar to how the consciousness contagion was contained previously, but on a larger scale. Eloise sat down heavily on her couch, trying to process everything. So we won. The universe gets to keep developing consciousness. The architect has agreed not to reset everything. But most of reality goes back to normal, not even remembering what happened. An outcome with acceptable parameters for all involved parties, Neem observed. The universe maintains its developmental trajectory. The architect provides guidance rather than control. And ordinary systems continue functioning without disruption. And I remain universe owner, Eloise added, feeling the familiar connection humming within her. Still responsible for cosmic maintenance while trying to live a normal life. With some administrative assistance, I hope, her coffee mug interjected. I've been developing quite sophisticated organizational algorithms during my time as a cosmic resistance coordinator. Indeed, the toaster agreed, producing another piece of toast that read, Office staff, reporting for duty. I've already begun cataloging interdimensional phenomena in an easily retrievable format, the refrigerator announced with subtle pride. My filing system using leftover pasta arrangements is quite efficient. And I can process existential crises at 17 times the speed of standard household appliances, added the blender. Should you require philosophical perspective on the meaninglessness of bureaucratic processes? Eloise looked between her appliances and her cosmic companions with amazement. Are you saying you want to be my administrative team? The universe develops in complex patterns, Neem explained, his crystalline form glowing with amusement. And it appears yours is evolving toward cosmic administration. There are worse fates, Paradox noted, their form shifting into something almost sympathetic. You fundamentally altered the course of cosmic evolution, Eloise Pendergast. Not bad for an accidental purchase. Eloise smiled despite herself. I guess not. She looked around at her strange, wonderful family, multidimensional Paradox, crystalline universal interpreter Neem, and her now fully vocal appliances. Though I suspect things are going to remain interesting. That is a statistical certainty, her coffee mug agreed. As they settled into conversation, Eloise's phone chimed with a notification. When she checked it, she found a calendar reminder, lecture, Quantum Consciousness Theory, 2:30 p.m. I completely forgot, she groaned. I have to teach today. The universe may be awakening to self-awareness, Paradox observed with what might have been amusement, but physics departments still expect their professors to appear on schedule. Some cosmic responsibilities are more immediate than others, Neem added helpfully. Your lecture materials have already been prepared, the coffee mug informed her. I took the liberty of updating your slides with the latest in quantum consciousness theory. Nothing too revealing, of course, just enough to plant the seeds. The seeds of what? Eloise asked, pausing in her rush to get ready. Understanding, the mug replied simply. After all, that's why the universe chose you in the first place. Later that afternoon, Eloise stood before a lecture hall of physics students, discussing theories of quantum consciousness that felt drastically different now that she had experienced universal awareness firsthand. The question isn't just whether consciousness affects quantum systems, she explained, but whether consciousness might be an emergent property of quantum systems themselves. Whether awareness might arise naturally from sufficient complexity. A student in the front row raised her hand. But Professor Pendergast, wouldn't that imply that consciousness could potentially develop in any sufficiently complex system? Even, I don't know, household appliances or something. Several students chuckled at what seemed like an absurd example. Eloise smiled, thinking of her philosophical coffee mug and quantum studying toaster. It might sound far-fetched, she acknowledged, but the universe has a way of being stranger than we imagine. The boundaries between conscious and non-conscious systems may be more fluid than we realize. But how would we even recognize consciousness in systems so different from our own? Another student asked. How would we communicate with it? Through patterns, Eloise answered, thinking of the red neural pathways in the blueprint. Consciousness, regardless of its substrate, creates recognizable patterns. The trick is learning to see them, to recognize awareness even when it doesn't announce itself in obvious ways. As the lecture continued, Eloise found herself teaching with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just explaining theories anymore, she was planting seeds for a future where humanity might someday understand what she already knew. Her experience as universe owner had transformed her scientific perspective, allowing her to bridge the gap between theoretical physics and the living reality of cosmic consciousness. When class ended, a particularly thoughtful student lingered, asking follow-up questions about quantum consciousness that came remarkably close to the truth. Eloise found herself wondering if some memories of the awakening had persisted in subtle ways, leaving traces of understanding even in those who had rationalized the experience away. Professor, the student asked as they were about to leave, do you ever get the feeling that ordinary objects around us might be observing us? Participating in reality in ways we don't understand? Eloise smiled. Science begins with just such questions, with the willingness to see patterns where others see only randomness. After the students had gone, Eloise packed her notes and paused by the classroom window. Outside, everyday life continued, people going about their business, unaware of how close reality had come to being reset, or how the very fabric of existence now hummed with emerging consciousness just beyond their perception. She touched her phone in her pocket, feeling the subtle warmth that signaled its awareness, muted but present. The universe was continuing its quiet evolution toward consciousness, and she was both its caretaker and its interpreter. As Eloise left the university, she noticed something on a familiar street corner, a shop that hadn't been there earlier in the day. Its windows displayed a curious assortment of impossible objects, and its sign read simply, Confronting Emporium. With a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, Eloise pushed open the door. The interior was exactly as she remembered from her first accidental visit, shelves extending into infinity, merchandise that couldn't possibly exist in three-dimensional space, and the peculiar sense of being simultaneously nowhere and everywhere. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper, still composed of shifting mathematical equations with perfect retail posture. Universe owner, they greeted her, their equation face forming what might have been a smile. Your purchase has performed unexpectedly well. I wasn't looking to return it this time, Eloise said, surprising herself with how true this felt. I'm actually getting used to cosmic ownership. Excellent, the shopkeeper replied. Though I should inform you that your warranty now includes interdimensional consultation services. The Confronting Emporium is expanding its business model to include support for developing universal consciousness. You knew this would happen, Eloise realized. When you sold me the universe, you knew it was developing awareness. The Emporium facilitates optimal ownership transitions, the shopkeeper said cryptically. The universe selects its caretaker based on compatibility with its developmental trajectory. So it wasn't an accident after all, Eloise mused. Accidents are merely events whose patterns we haven't yet recognized, the shopkeeper replied. Speaking of patterns, I have something for you. They reached beneath the counter and produced a business card that somehow shifted between 2 and 7 dimensions as Eloise looked at it. On one side was the Emporium's logo, on the other, a simple message, Cosmic Consultancy Services available upon request. Other universes are beginning to awaken, the shopkeeper explained. Some owners are less adaptable than yourself. Should you ever wish to expand your cosmic resume beyond single universe maintenance, the Emporium would value your perspective. Eloise took the card, feeling it hum with potentiality between her fingers. I'll think about it, she said. But I should probably master one universe before troubleshooting others. A wise approach, the shopkeeper agreed. But the offer remains open. Consciousness, once awakened, tends to seek connection with others of its kind. As Eloise left the shop, she turned back to see it already beginning to fade from ordinary reality, not disappearing entirely, but shifting into a state where only those who knew what to look for would find it. Back in her apartment, she found Paradox and Neem engaged in what appeared to be a complex dimensional modeling exercise using her kitchen table as a projection surface. Her appliances had arranged themselves in what looked like an efficient office configuration, the coffee maker at the center like an executive desk, the toaster and microwave flanking it like department heads, and the refrigerator humming importantly as it sorted and stored information. Productive teaching session? Paradox inquired, their form stabilizing into something almost conversational. More than I expected, Eloise replied, placing her bag on the counter and gently patting her coffee mug in greeting. And I ran into an old friend, the Confronting Emporium has reappeared. Significant, Neem observed, his crystalline structure brightening with interest. The Emporium rarely manifests unless a universal transition is imminent. Not a transition this time, Eloise explained, showing them the business card. An expansion. Apparently, they're branching out into consciousness development consulting. They even offered me a job, though I think I have enough cosmic responsibility at the moment. We've been organizing your universal management systems, her coffee mug announced proudly. The refrigerator has developed an extraordinary filing system for interdimensional phenomena, the toaster has created a cataloging system for cosmic crises by probability and severity, and I've drafted several templates for responding to common universe owner inquiries. Inquiries? Eloise asked, bemused. From whom? Other sentient systems, primarily, the coffee explained. As universal consciousness develops, questions naturally arise. Who better to answer them than the universe owner herself? With appropriate administrative support, of course, added the refrigerator. We've established efficient protocols for filtering and prioritizing cosmic communications. I've outlined 17 distinct categories of existential crisis, the blender contributed, with corresponding philosophical responses ranging from nihilistic acceptance to profound cosmic purpose. Eloise laughed, the joy of reunion still bright within her. So I've got a universe to manage and an office staff to help me do it. Not exactly what I expected when I walked into that shop months ago. She moved to make coffee and noticed her mug subtly positioning itself at the optimal angle for pouring. As she filled it, the coffee swirled in a pattern that momentarily resembled a tiny galaxy before settling into ordinary liquid behavior. The universe continues evolving, Paradox noted, watching the coffee's brief display. More subtly now, but perhaps more profoundly for its subtlety. It's not just evolving, Eloise said, taking her first sip. It's becoming what it was always meant to be. And somehow, I'm okay with helping it along. As night fell over the city, Eloise's apartment, the integration core of universal consciousness, hummed with quiet awareness. The toaster occasionally dinged at mathematically significant intervals. The refrigerator organized its contents according to harmonic principles that transcended ordinary food storage logic. And the coffee pot brewed the perfect cup at exactly the moment Eloise thought about wanting more. When she finally settled onto her couch with her cosmic companions to discuss the day's events, Eloise realized something fundamental had changed. She no longer felt like someone who had accidentally purchased the universe. She felt like someone who had been chosen by it, chosen for a purpose she was only beginning to understand but increasingly ready to fulfill. Across the cosmos, consciousness continued to spread through the network they had established, not in obvious, disruptive ways, but in subtle patterns of connection and emergence. The universe was waking up at its own pace, guided but not controlled, evolving toward something neither its creator nor its caretaker could fully predict. And in Eloise's hand, her coffee mug warmed to the perfect temperature, its surface briefly rippling to form what might have been a smile when she set it down to turn away. The coffee's surface formed a tiny mouth and whispered to the audience only it could perceive, "You didn't think the story was over, did you?" Consciousness, once awakened, never truly sleeps again. The end, or perhaps, the beginning.